Hello, my name is Maria Wilma Capati of Soka University in Tokyo, Japan, and I would like to discuss more on translanguaging with my presentation entitled Translanguaging Approach on Anxiety and Motivation in Tertiary EFL Classes. For my presentation in this video, I would like to talk about 6 things. First is the definition of translanguaging for those who are not familiar with this topic. Next, I will also talk about the literature on how L1 is related with anxiety and motivation of students. On the next part, I will also talk about previous studies regarding the perspective of students and teachers of translanguaging. And then I will present my research questions. I have 2 research questions for this topic. And afterwards, I will discuss my methodology, results, and discussion. Okay. Finally, I will also talk about my conclusion and recommendation. So let's go to the first part where we talk about translanguaging and its definition. According to Garcia, translanguaging involves multiple discursive practices in which bilinguals engage in order to make sense of their bilingual worlds. Okay, so I highlighted multiple discursive practices, which will be discussed later. And in this definition of translanguaging by Garcia and Wei, this approach considers the language practices of bilinguals not as 2 autonomous language systems, but as one linguistic repertoire, which features that have been societally constructed. So not 2, but 1. So these are also highlighted in this case. Finally, translanguaging refers to using one language in order to reinforce the other, in order to increase understanding and augment pupils' activity in both languages. So this was a definition by Lewis and Baker. So as you have seen in the previous slides, I have highlighted these definitions or these keywords from the definitions. First, you have multiple discursive practices. And second, not as 2 autonomous language systems, but as one linguistic repertoire. And finally, one language to reinforce another. So based on these highlights from the definitions, at first, in language learning, you might think that it will be learners L1 independent from the target language. So you can see in this photo, they are separated, but you can switch from one language to another. However, in translanguaging, we can view the languages in this case. So learners L1 and target language are codependent from each other. So in order to be more bilingual. So in relation to this was a definition by Wei. Translanguaging aims to create a social space for multilingual speakers by bringing together different dimensions of their personal history, experience, and environment, their attitudes, beliefs, and performance. So given those definitions, it is seen that the L1 of the student is vital in order to do this approach. We have previous literatures before that connects L1 with anxiety and motivation of the students. Here we will see on how L1, the use of L1 is correlated with the motivation of the students to learn the language and also their anxiety in using the language. So first, I'll talk about the anxiety. So in this case, I would like to talk about language anxiety, wherein students with language anxiety tend to convey less information and may commit more errors than students who are more relaxed. And then the lack of expression of anxious students. If you are anxious, of course, it will affect the output. So this was also pointed out by McIntyre, Knowles, and Clement in 1997. Furthermore, the presence of L1 is bilingual training, and it will reduce language anxiety among nervous L2 learners. This was an argument by Lassebaster. In addition, the presence of L1 as an advantage to access knowledge and culture, as well as the possibility of meta-discourse between students and teachers. The presence of L1 in the classroom may not only reduce anxiety, but also validate learner identity. This was according to Levine in 2012. So this is important. So it may also validate the learner identity. So given these connection of L1 and anxiety, so there was a study in motivation by Anne, Shin, and Kang in 2018, wherein there were two groups, so Translanguaging group and English-only group. So there was no increase of willingness to communicate in the English-only group, while the Translanguaging group's willingness to communicate has significantly increased. In Japan, so Japanese high school students, according to Aoyama, so there was a partial use of L1 in the classroom in order to communicate in collaborative activities. In spite of the presence of L1 in the classroom, there was no negative perception of its presence. There were, however, challenges in translanguaging pedagogy as seen in multilingual classroom. First, there was low motivation among students. So in this study, it was given an example wherein one student who just transferred from this to this country was actually was not familiar with the language in that country. However, the teacher kind of encouraged that student to speak the language in that country. So that gave a low motivation to that student. And then the lack of knowledge was also pointed out in that sense. And then there was also confusion in alternating the language. So not all students are capable of switching from one language to another. Some students get confused, some students are flexible about it. However, it was pointed out that in this study, there was confusion. And finally, linguistic isolation. So if I am not mistaken, the example given was there was a Spanish student who is the only one who spoke Spanish in the classroom. So if you're the only person speaking a different language or the language from your country, that kind of give an awkward situation for the student. So that was linguistic isolation. So there were previous studies already of translanguaging in other countries, which also focus on the perspectives of students and teachers. Okay. So for perspective, there were positive perceptions towards translanguaging in previous studies. However, according to both Allard and Yuvayapan, so the studies were conducted in 2017 and 2019 respectively, institutional policies may hinder the use of translanguaging as an approach in the classroom. In Hong Kong, however, in a mathematics class in Hong Kong, teachers who promote co-learning in the classroom with the presence of L1 and English created a safer space for the students. So in a study of Rivera and Mazak in 2017, the perspectives of students towards translanguaging was neutral to positive, in a sense that whether there's translanguaging approach or not, nothing is changed. So the class can continue with or without translanguaging. So I've given only partial of my literature review, so apologies for that. But in my statement of the problem, okay, so even though there were studies that correlate the use of L1 and language anxiety as well as motivation, there's no specific correlation of translanguaging, pedagogy, and language anxiety and motivation in a monolingual country like Japan. So the current literature have sufficient information of direct correlation of students' language anxiety and the use of translanguaging. So since Japan is a monolingual country, if we may say, and the English is a foreign language, so we may explore this impact, the impact of translanguaging in tertiary level in addressing their language anxiety as well as their motivation. So I have two research questions for this study. First, is there a significant relationship between the use of L1 and the presence of language anxiety and motivation in the classroom? And second, how is translanguaging approach perceived in the context of tertiary level Japanese EFL education? So I have a sub-question for the second one. Do the students and teachers of English communication classes perceive the presence of L1 in class as an advantage or hindrance in effectively communicating in English? For methodology, I have submitted questionnaire in the midst of the pandemic. So everything was online. And I adapted survey of Turnbull, which was also submitted in JALT journal. So which this centered on the perspectives of students and teachers in terms of translanguaging approach in Japan. So I have made some minimal modifications in order to cater the anxiety and motivation part. So I included the studies of Ohata relating to anxiety and L1 use. I did a pilot study a year ago to 34 undergraduate students and 8 teachers online. Final participants, after the survey and questionnaire were checked, final participants were 88 undergraduate students and 10 teachers of undergraduate students. So for the participants, these are their TOEIC scores, which may determine their level. So in order for you to be familiar, so most of them are, excuse me for the word that I may say, elementary level of English. Okay. So this is it. So most of them have 281 to 395 scores. Some of them got 296 to 495, and some of them were 280 and below. As for the teachers, so these are 10 teachers, so they may teach more than one subject or more than one level. So the most level that is being taught is intermediate, okay, followed by advanced, and then elementary and basic are tied. So I would like to present the results and discussion for this study. So for the first research question, is there a significant relationship? The question is about the L1 use in the English classroom. So the exact question is about how should L1 be used in the following skills? Okay. So through weighted mean or weighted average, so I calculated the answers of the teachers and the students. So the students tend to agree on the use of the skill of L1 in these skills than the teachers. However, in terms of vocabulary, and same with the students, vocabulary, so both teachers and students have higher mean in this case. So they tend to agree, meaning that the use of L1 may be done in vocabulary. And then the use of Japanese when anxiety is present. So the question was, for the teachers, do you increase the use of Japanese when anxiety is present? For the students, does your teacher increase the use of L1 when anxiety is present? So 6 of the teachers said that they do not increase L1 use, while 4 teachers do increase L1. As for the students, so 56 students said that yes, my teacher increased the use of L1. As for the 32 students, they say no, my teacher does not increase the use of L1 in the classroom. And then what are the reasons for these results? So according to the teachers, so which more than half of them said that they do not increase the use of L1, the lack of Japanese ability is the reason. And another reason is that teachers use other communicative strategies that do not require the use of L1. As one teacher said, language is not a stress reducer. So alternative to L1 use, so this was from the Ohata. Okay, so some of them use background music, jokes, interactive activities such as games. As for motivation from the respondents, so from the teacher respondents, so one teacher said that they asked the students to set a goal in class, so a personal goal. This is in order to tap their intrinsic motivation and reduce their anxiety. So they have a goal for this case. And then next, using multiple types of communication and ensuring student-teacher rapport. So in order to reduce anxiety, this teacher ensures that she or she is connected with the student. So this is through Zoom, Line, and email, as given by the teacher as an example. And another teacher said students should be feeling comforted or feel supported. Students are motivated when they understand things better. For the second research question, how is translanguaging approach perceived? So this was based on Turnbull's questionnaire. So does foreign language education should be bilingual education? Question. So students said agree, okay, while some of the teachers also agreed with this case. And for the bilingual continuum, the question was, you rate yourself from 10 being bilingual and 1 being not at all bilingual. So where are you in this case? So the students were asked, and the teachers were asked, how about your students? Are they bilingual or not at all bilingual? So most of the students answered 5 below, meaning that they don't consider themselves bilingual. As for the teachers, so the highest was 6, and then the next one was 4. So no, I don't consider the students bilingual in this case. For the 6, it's somehow in the middle. And next, so translanguaging approach in the classroom. So is it interesting for you? So for teachers and students, they said yes, a little bit. So they were also provided the definition of translanguaging in Japanese for the students and in English for teachers. So these are the open-ended answers for this question. So some teacher F said, I view the use of L1 as short-term remedy, while teacher E said language systems are not learned or used in isolation. So somehow similar to translanguaging in a sense. So for the students, so student F said, I want to speak Japanese when I cannot express myself in English. So similar approach, similar belief with student G. As for student H, I am not interested with this approach. Okay. To summarize, a similar situation in the study of Allard where teachers use English and Spanish through translation strategy. So this is not translanguaging because languages were considered in an isolated manner, so translation. And then the use of L1 in class is increased according to the students, especially these are elementary level students. It is similar to Shuchi and Islam 2016, where the use of L1 with low-level students is present. Other strategies were used by teachers. So instead of using L1, they use goals, jokes, games, and interactive lessons. And for the second research question, most of the student respondents think that they are far from being bilingual. Translanguaging is helpful, perceived to be helpful, but there are students and teachers who are not interested. So students do not understand, teachers prefer other strategies. In conclusion, majority of the elementary level students in this study prefer the presence of L1 through translanguaging, but it is still vague to them. Teachers are interested, but prefer other strategies. So the unfamiliarity may aid the students, but it may become a challenge in the classroom. And finally, anxiety and motivation may be affected with other strategies. So for recommendations, so hopefully undergraduate students in other levels, such as advanced level, may be asked about their views about their translanguaging, and teachers as well. So classroom observations will also be possible. So the limitation was that the surveys were conducted online in the midst of pandemic. That's all. So this is my email. If you have questions, feel free to ask me. Thank you very much.